between the Green Deal and competitiveness, but still for your re-election you may need support from the conservative right. And last week, even the French President, Emmanuel Macron, he shifted away from the Green Deal, focusing on investment and competitiveness instead. How will you ensure then that the Green Deal survives?
So I think the argument is very clear that the whole world is looking into developing the path for the clean technologies. The United States are investing massively with the Inflation Reduction Act into clean technologies. The Gulf states, sitting on gas and fossil fuels, are investing massively in clean hydrogen because they know it is the energy for the future. China is investing in electric vehicles. So for us, it must be very clear that this is the road to go. We are the world leaders in clean technologies, but we want to stay there. And this is very convincing because this is the economy of the future, where we have to really catch up with the others and be bold with our work. And therefore, it is for me also a question of the competitiveness of the European Union to go clean and to be decarbonized.
Thank you. Mr. Vistesen, you say climate policy has run wild, but how will you ensure that the EU will meet its climate goals?
I'm not going to. That's the simple fact of the matter. The EU policy is only doing one thing. It's shifting jobs out of Europe. It's costing our competitiveness towards Asia, towards the US. And it's making millions of Europeans experience a level of poverty and disenfranchisement with the political elite that is represented here today. So if Europe wants to really make a green transition, we have to focus on innovation and market-ready models, not state subsidies, not competing with the US over the ludicrous policy just to put state money into industry, but keeping our jobs here and keeping our inventions here in Europe to combat the climate change in reality, not just in vision.
Thank you. Mr. Eickhout, the Greens have been very good at pressing for tough targets, but polling suggests that voters don't think that you are the right party to implement them. Why are people turning away from the Greens?
Well, I do think that the Green Deal is not complete yet. So I think also a lot of the young voters here still demand this climate urgency. I mean, in 2019, it was Ursula von der Leyen saying, I'm going to do my man on the moon project. Just imagine that JFK, after 4 years, would have said, well, maybe halfway to the moon is okay as well. You know, when we are doing climate action and deliver on climate neutrality, we need to invest in a new economy. We need to be competitive, but that means an investment program that Europe is lacking. That means also investments in housing to make sure that you can live in clean, affordable houses. This means investing in public transport so that we do have finally real clean transport. The Green Deal was a good start, but we are only at the beginning of this marathon.
Thank you. Thank you. Mrs. Rosberg, the former European Central Bank President, Mario Draghi, he said much more huge funds are needed to finance the green transition. Where would those funds come from, according to you?
Well, first of all, I would like to start that it makes me really, really, really angry that we in this round, in general, have to discuss if the Green Deal should be kept alive or if we actually going to follow what we agreed on. And I think it's an insult to all these young people, to me as well, that some people on the stage are actually saying that climate protection is not needed. You're playing with our future. You're playing with our hopes. Well,
thank you. And now an answer to the question, please.
Yes, sorry. Well, I believe that we have a lot of potential in the region still. I don't see that the European Union is fully integrated. We want to revitalize regions and the outermost areas in the European Union, and in that way make sure that we get the full potential out of the single market, and that way also we'll have more resources to pay for climate change and climate protection.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ghilecci. Recent scientific reports are warning for a lack of preparedness when it comes to stop global warming. How do you explain this negligence to our European audience sitting behind us?
Well, in accordance to the Christian worldview, we believe that nature was created by God, and we as human beings are called to protect it and to preserve it for ourselves, for these young people, their children, and future generations. So it's an important topic that we need to look at, but at the same time, we need to be aware that climate change has costs and consequences, but so do climate policies. And we believe in a balanced approach between preserving the nature and flourishing people or well-being of people. So we believe in policies that will have this balanced approach when it comes to climate change. This is our position as a European Christian political movement. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for your answers. We will now listen to a pre-recorded question from our audience.
After 4 years of hard negotiation to get us a Green Deal, we saw in a couple of days some measures for sustainable agriculture being withdrawn. My question to the candidates is, are you ready to provide the European farmers with a long-term vision for the 2030 next years? And what is this vision?
Mr. Eickhout, to start with you, you want to spend 10% of the EU budget on restoring biodiversity. We can read in your manifesto. How would you finance that, and would you spend less on, say, defense or agricultural subsidies?
No, I think you have to be very honest. Europe will have a lot of investments that we need to be ready for. So we are very clear as a Green Group saying we need a European investment fund. We need more sovereignty as Europe, and that also means investments from the European level so that we can invest in our economy, in our transition of our economy, also in our social welfare state, because otherwise, and that is really the problem, everyone tonight will do a lot of promises about spending. But then at the same time, they are voting in the European Parliament for going back to austerity, cutting on our expenditures. So we have not learned from the euro crisis. We are at the front of a austerity 2.0 again, whereas Europe needs investments for our nature, but also for our farmers and for our economy. So this needs to be the decade of investments, and I expect from the other candidates to now really finally come up with a European investment program.
Thank you. We turn to Mr. Galecki again. You call for a reform of the EU's agricultural subsidies. You want to get the power on agriculture back to member states. How do you avoid this undermines the EU's single market?
Well, we believe in a single market, but at the same time, we believe in the sovereignty of states, and we believe that there are competencies that are not to the European institutions, but they belong to the member states. So when it comes to farming or it comes to agriculture, I would like to reiterate what I said just a bit earlier. We believe in a balanced approach. We need to have this balanced approach if you don't want to have people left behind, if you don't want poverty, if we want people to flourish and we want people to be prosperous. We need to have these balanced policies driven by data, driven by science, based on facts, not driven by ideologies. It's our conviction that with balanced policies, we will be able, as I said, to take care of the nature, but also of the well-being of people, in this case, of farmers.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Galecki. Mrs. von der Leyen, we have seen in the past years your tremendous and unwavering support for Ukraine. But nevertheless, the EU has weakened its support for Ukraine farmers. And the Polish and French farmers who are blocking the streets of Brussels, pouring manure on the sidewalk, do they eventually matter more than the Ukrainian farmers?
No, not at all. It is important that we find the right balance. But let me first of all say one word to the European Green Deal and its financing, because I'm sobered to see that there is not the knowledge out there that we have the next generation EU and we have the EU budget. 655 billion euros are ready for being invested in the European Green Deal. So I think this is a good news and we should really share it with each other. Now, what Ukraine is concerned, we have to, and the farmers in the frontline states, we have to be very careful that Putin is not wiping off Ukraine from the map. We have to help them. That's what we did with the solidarity lanes. But our farmers also feel the pressure of the Russian war. Energy prices up, fertilizer prices up, pressure on the market. So what we have to do is make sure that there is a licensing system so that there's a balance and that the Ukrainian grain goes out to the countries in the global south that are waiting for the Ukrainian grain. And I think we are able to find this balance, help Ukraine, support Ukraine, help our farmers in the frontline state, and bring the grain to where it is needed.
Thank you. Mr. Schmidt, you want to continue to defend the Green Deal while improving the life of farmers. How exactly would you do that, as agricultural emissions are still a significant percentage of greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, farmers need a safe environment, natural environment. There is no farming if we cannot preserve the safety of our environment. And that's why we have to associate farmers in implementing the Green Deal. And by the way, farmers have protested because sometimes they have the feeling that their work is not respected. Their work is not really paid at a decent level. And it's about income. It's about fair prices for their products. So I think here we have to reflect on the way how the future of agricultural policy will go and associate it absolutely with our efforts to make other farmers also actors in the area of implementation of the Green Deal.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. While the EU is moving to a green transition, the challenge is to keep all citizens on board. And we continue with some specific questions on this. Mr. Bayer, as you started saying in your opening statement, you want to enshrine affordable housing in EU law. What do you want the EU to do to ensure that affordable housing?
Well, we would like to see a directive on the part of the European Union obliging the member states to introduce rent caps. We want to create a European fund for affordable housing. We want to limit Airbnb. So there is a responsibility on the part of the European Union, but allow me to say a word to that what Mrs. von der Leyen was saying. Well, Next Generation EU Fund, 700 billion euro. Experts say that we need for the ecological transition 300 to 600 billion euro per year. And it's impossible to have this money under the condition of the reintroduction of austerity politics. So my question to you, Mrs. von der Leyen, would be, how will you finance the Green Deal, the new Green Deal, when introducing
Thank you. I think the question is clear. Thank you. I'll let Mrs. von der Leyen respond.
Of course, public money is not enough. 655 billion is a lot of money, but it is not enough. We also need private money. And here we have started to issue green bonds. They are heavily oversubscribed, so the market is asking for green activity and green action. This is very good. And the second point is we have to complete our capital markets union. Because if we had the capital markets union, we would have 470 billion euros per year additional for investment. So public money, yes, but private money is also necessary to make the European Green Deal, to keep the European Green Deal running, and therefore we need both of them.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann, we were talking about housing. What can or should the EU do to restrict high rental profits and speculation on real estate?
Let me tell you first that in this debate about the agriculture, we have first to clear that farmers are not the enemies of climate, like the left says. They are not a tool to avoid climate action like the far-right ones. Many farmers, this is really very important to know, many farmers want to do the climate transition, but they want us to support them on this, and we must be on their side. And the huge thing is the bureaucracy in this European Union. And I could say that there is a much unnecessary red tape on the farmers. Often this red tape is added by the member states. And I say one market, one rules. We must make reporting simpler and the same reporting everywhere in the EU. This helps the farmers and not only in new programs.
Thank you, Mrs. Strauss. May I give you a kind reminder of your possibilities? You can wave with your jolly if you want to pose a question to one of the other candidates, and you can also react to somebody who just raised your hand. That is all possible. Mrs. Rosberg, to continue, competitiveness comes to the fore as a core issue for the next European Commission. Do you consider the Green Deal an obstacle to competitiveness, or is it merely a prerequisite for a competitive Europe?
No, actually the opposite. I see the Green Deal as the only real solution to stay competitive as the European Union. And that's why it makes me so angry that there are forces that are trying to literally kill it. For me, or for the European Free Alliance, competitiveness is directly connected to being sustainable, to making sure that the European Union is actually in this race with the big other powers, China and USA, when it comes to the new industries we will have in the future. So, of course, the Green Deal is the only chance we, in general, have to play a role in this world.
Thank you. Mr. Vistisen, a majority of your group voted against the minimum wage directive and other social policies in the European Parliament. How do you want to make sure citizens can secure their livelihoods during this green transition that we are talking about?
I come from Denmark. We have no minimum wage. We have a collective bargaining system. But I think 26 other countries would rather have the de facto minimum wage of Denmark than what they're experiencing at home. In Germany, lower income people have to work 2 jobs. In Denmark, low income is sufficient to survive. But that's the solution for everything in this panel. More EU bureaucracy, more taxation, and more power over the member states. If you want to look at a high-income country where you don't need to have 2, 3, 4 internships before you get a proper paying job, go to Denmark, where we have no political decided minimum wage, but where we have an effective, competitive societal model.
Thank you, Mr. Vistisen. Thank you all for your replies. We see question, yes. Mrs.
Actually, in this case, I'm from the Danish minority in Germany, so I know how the situation also is in Denmark, and I think it's very weird to compare countries that have a whole different system of society of welfare. It doesn't make sense to me, and I think this needs to be highlighted in this context.
Thank you. Thank you. Mrs. von der Leyen.
I want just to add to the topic of competitiveness and the European Green Deal. The European Green Deal is not a problem of competitiveness. On the contrary, it's the solution for the competitiveness of our economy. Because what hinders our economy? It's the lack of skill, for example. It's the lack of digitalization. It's high energy prices. And if you want to get the energy prices down, you have to invest in renewable energy. Renewable energy is homegrown, good jobs at home here, and it lowers the prices. So the European Green Deal is the solution for the competitiveness of the European economy.
Mr. Eickhout.
I'm happy to hear that, because we were discussing agriculture, and unfortunately, Madam von der Leyen, what we have seen is that you are lowering and really watering down the Green Deal for our farmers, as if green policies are the problem. The real problem of our farmers is they don't have a decent income. The profits go to the agro industry, they go to the supermarkets, they determine the prices and not the farmers. If you really want to help the farmers, you need to do something about our market model where the farmers are paying the price. And instead of that, you are pretending to help them by just removing some green policies. That is scapegoating green policies over the back of the real concerns that the farmers have.
Okay, Bas Eickhout, you know, what we have done is that we invited for a sustainable solution, not only the farmers, but also the environmental group for our structured dialogue for the future of the agriculture in the European Union. Because, like you, I think that the farmers are the solution also to fight climate change and to protect nature, the best ambassadors we can find. So we have to find a system that, together with them and the environmental groups that are working in this dialogue, that we are able to meet the climate goals also in the farming sector. And that's what we're doing right now. So instead of pushing hard to polarize, I would invite you to listen to this dialogue, because this is the program for the next mandate. And we want to do green policies and protection of nature together with the farmers, because they are the solution for the protection of nature.
I'm happy to, very briefly, I'm happy to do that. But then in the meanwhile, Why are you withdrawing our policies on reducing pesticides, which is not helping the farmers, because also the pesticides kill farmers? Why are you lowering all the green demands that we have for our agriculture policy so that they even just get money for free? You are at the same time lowering the green standards while we are doing this dialogue. That's maybe not the way to go.
Can I answer? Is it
I think we have to. I think we have to wrap up this team,
Yeah,
but we will continue to discuss each of these policies.
One more answer.
We will.
If you can make it a short answer,
I
then
try
we'll
hard.
wrap up.
I try hard. So, what have we done? We had asked initially the farmers to have certain crops on their land. They had to take photos and send these photos back to those who control the farming. So what we've said is, for those who have less than 10 hectares, so small farms, we trust you. We don't want the controls anymore, we trust you. And with that, we reach 65% of the farmers, but only 10% of the European land. So a solution where we give trust to the small farms and where we reach our climate goals.
Thank you. Thank you for this passionate debate. But let's move on quickly to our second theme, which is also very urgent. We're going to talk about foreign and security policy.
Europe's foreign policy has been particularly challenged by the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Important concerns of young citizens pertain to Europe's responsibility in promoting peace and preserving stability in a region plagued by conflict and tension.
We will again kick off this team with a general question. How should the EU step up its foreign and security policy in this changing geopolitical world? Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. This is really a very, very important topic. And I could say that if you travel through Ukraine, if you see what happens there, raped women, children are lost, and all these terrible things, then we have to learn to work together. Because if the Ukraine will lose this war, this world for your young people will definitely different than the world which we grow up. So we have to stand together. We have to create a common defense. Especially, nobody knows what will happen in the United States. So we have to wake up as a European Union. We are a strong continent with 450,000 people, and we have to do more, and we have to start now immediately.
Thank you. Mr. Schmidt. Mr. Schmidt, you want the EU to be an efficient promoter of defense, you said. Are you in favor of so-called defense bonds to issue joint European debts to invest in weaponry?
Well, I think that Europe needs to build up a serious security and defense policy. It was initially, by the way, decided here in Maastricht. Unfortunately, it took a lot of time before now we became aware that defense is absolutely crucial for Europe. For the time being, we depend on a vote in Wisconsin if the president of the US continues to support Europe or not. And we depend on an aggressor on our eastern border. So I think defense policy has to be a core issue and it has to be financed. And that's why I think we need a special defense fund, but we need also more integration, more cooperation, more common purchases of all kinds of military equipment.
Thank you. Mrs. von der Leyen, you advocate for a defense commissioner for more investments on defense. How do you respond not only to Mr. Vistisen next to you, but also to several European capitals who are concerned about a European Commission power grab?
So, by being very clear, we have the member states' responsibility, that is, for example, the organization of the troop, the deployment. So all these topics are member states. But the single market, the industry, that is European Commission competence. And the defense industry then is also European Commission competence. And investing in the defense industry is necessary because the risks for Europe that we see right now are clear and present. We need a stronger Europe. We need economic strength, but we also need military capabilities made in Europe. I want good jobs that result from these investments here in Europe, And I want military capabilities made in Europe so that we have interoperability between our troops. This is competence of the European Commission and the European level to work on the single market, and therefore this is my answer.
Thank you. Mr. Vistisen, you are calling for more national sovereignty on defense. But how can the EU provide sufficient deterrent against Russian aggression if the different countries cannot work together?
That's the job for NATO and for every single European country who is a member of NATO. That's where the deterrent lies. We don't have nuclear capabilities in the EU, neither should we have it. So we can never be a deterrent. But let's be honest about what all of this defense talk is really about. It's about your vision to have a new treaty where you abolish the veto right on foreign policy, on security policy, on taxation policy, where you want to create a EU presidency and where you want a real foreign affairs minister of Europe. This is sort of the camouflage that the Ukraine war is being used by you to drive this European integration through. And if you really want to see who is contributing in Ukraine, you would see many of the statesmen who are talking the loudest, including Macron, falling short and not delivering anything on military capability in Ukraine.
Thank you. Mr. Eckhout, you wanted to respond?
Yeah, to be very honest, I'm getting a bit tired. We are having here a person that is standing there on behalf of the ID group. All the problems that we're seeing now with Russia buying influence to the AfD, it's your ID group. It's China buying the Flemish party that is part of your ID group. We see how China is also influencing within this same AfD party. We see Russia in France from your party, the FPÖ Austria, your party. Maybe before you are teaching everyone, clean up your own house.
Thank you. I assume you want to respond?
And before that, we were seeing. Before that, we were seeing Qatar buying off your parties. We were seeing Morocco buying off your parties.
Can you answer to the questions?
We were seeing a high level of corruption all across the European Parliament. And nobody has been more vigorous in wanting to implement stricter rules than the ID group. And if there is a criminal case against any member of the ID group, we will take it seriously. But when there is a criminal case against the Commission President, you want to re-elect her. That's the difference between your hypocrisy and our right to rule.
Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann, you wanted to react?
May I disturb your discussion? You have definitely more experience in European Union. So my question, where are you the last years? I have no discussion in the European Parliament about the situation, and we have to do it now, and maybe somebody could explain me, where are you? It's nearly too late, because if we don't do more, absolutely more for Ukraine will lose this war, and this would be a catastrophe for the whole world, not only for Europe.
Mr. Vistisen, we let you respond one more time?
Easily enough. Denmark, including my party, the Danish People's Party, have now contributed more to the Ukrainian war effort than France, Spain and Italy combined ×2. So if your country of Belgium would just contribute a little bit to the Ukrainian war effort.
I'm the Netherlands, sorry. It's maybe for the audience. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm here.
If the
Mr. Vistisen will let you.
I know it's difficult to look beyond Denmark
like
for you.
Denmark, then Ukraine would actually have a chance to win this war. Then they would maybe have the million shells that you promised them and couldn't deliver. But since you are only talking and power grabbing and not delivering on your promises, then you're not getting anywhere in Ukraine or elsewhere. So it's all talk and no action, unfortunately, when it comes to this policy, and that is why it should be a matter of the national states, not of EU bureaucracy.
We'll leave it at that, Mr. Vistisen. Thank you. Mrs. Rosberg, your party consists of regionalist and separatist political parties. How does that match with more European defense cooperation?
Well, first of all, we are the party defending the rights of the national minorities and stateless nations in the European Union. And we are a pro-European party, and for us, subsidiarity is very important. What we see is we want to do policies as on the lowest level as possible, but there are things like minority rights or climate change that needs to be handled on the European level. Where we see a problem with a common defense currently is that we cannot even agree on a foreign policy. So we don't really understand the question of a common defense if we already struggle to, in general, speak with one language in the world.
Thank you. Mr. Gielecki, we move to you. To the same topic, several candidates argue we should have a more European security approach. You argue the opposite. If Europe is divided, how can it compete on the world stage?
Well, since we are talking about countries of our origin, let me tell you where I am from. I'm from the Republic of Moldova. And Moldova was probably the first country after Ukraine who felt the consequences of this aggression. And I have to say that we in Moldova, and I believe Ukrainians, they are very grateful for the help that was offered to them. We need to support Ukraine. This war needs to be won by democracy, by freedom. So this is why we need this cooperation. Yes, we as a party are aware that NATO plays a very important role, but also as an European Union, we can cooperate together to defend our fundamental values, speaking now about Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bayer. Mr. Bayer, the European left wants to end the ongoing arms race and says it's in favor of peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. What would that look like? Would that be Ukraine giving up territory to Russia?
First of all, we condemn, like everybody here seems to be, we are condemning the Russian aggression. But what we think is that after 500,000 deaths, and in a situation where it seems that there will be no solution on the battlefield, it's now time to come up with a political solution. And secondly, what I don't like in this discussion is that everybody argues as if this was the only war in the world. I ask you all here, what about Israel? You are right. You are rightly putting sanctions on Russia for committing the war crimes which it does. But when will you put sanctions on Israel?
I mean, Mr. Bayer. But Mr. Bayer, I would like to come back to our question. Would it look like peace negotiations, would it look like Ukraine giving up territory to Russia if you say we need a political solution?
Political solution means that the people concerned, which is the Ukrainian government, which is the Russian government, which is NATO, which is the US, discuss how to come up to a ceasefire and end this manslaughtering in the Ukraine. I cannot understand how anybody could defend the idea that we should continue this war until when? Until the last Ukrainian soldier has died?
Mrs. von der Leyen, please.
I'm getting tired of hearing that because, I mean, beg your pardon, but I have been 7 times in Ukraine. I've been in Bucha. I've seen the body bags. If you want to end this war, Putin just has to stop fighting. Then the war's over. And therefore, we should not turn around. We should not turn around the topic. And to you, I mean, when I look, when I see what your AfD colleagues, the lead candidates, have done, they are under investigation for being in the pocket of Putin. And if you look at the electoral program, you will see that it echoes the lies and the propaganda of the Kremlin. So clean up your house before you criticize us.
Ms. von der Leyen are directly responsible as a minister in Germany for the so-called Energiewende, who made all of us more dependent on Russian gas, Russian oil. When I was chairing the AFET committee in the European Parliament during that time, all of your colleagues from your party, from the SPD, came and told us there was no nothing to be afraid of from Putin. You could trade with him. Gerald Schröder was a decent guy who was heading this private company.
Big mistake.
So
big
yes,
mistake.
we all have skeletons in the Ukrainian debate, but we have stood firm in the Danish People's Party on this issue for much longer on Russia, on China, than you ever did in German politics. So let's go back, compare our record. I'm not afraid of that, Ursula, because we have been on the right side of history. You have been in Germany on the wrong side when it comes to China, when it comes to Russia.
Mr. Bayer, you put up your Jolly card, which is the first one in this debate. Go ahead.
Yes, Mrs. von der Leyen, you very elegantly avoided the question which I was asking to you. When will the European Union put sanctions on Israel to stop the war in Gaza?
I have been in the kibbutz Kfar Aza right after the attacks, and I've seen the bodies. And I've been very clear in my interaction with the Israeli government that Israel has the right to defend itself within the limits of humanitarian law and international law. And I've been to Rafah, the border crossing point. And I must say, to see how many innocent civilians are dying, especially children, is unbearable and it is unacceptable. And therefore we need a ceasefire. We need the ceasefire now. We need the release of the hostages now. And we need to sit down and work on a two-state solution because this is the only solution that will bring peace to the region.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Eickhout.
Just that we hear it correctly. Are you now very clearly saying, I draw a red line, as soon as Netanyahu invades Rafah, then we will pose sanctions on Israel? Is this the red line that you are finally drawing? I think I heard that.
I'm never drawing red lines, but I think it would be completely unacceptable if Netanyahu would invade Rafah.
And what does that mean?
Well, that then we sit down with our member states and act on that.
Okay.
Also to this topic, Ms. von der Leyen, you also just said that as soon as the humanitarian frame is stepped over, as soon as we step over that line, the right to defend for Israel is basically over. How do we define this line? How do we define what is still in the frame of international law? Because there are accusations of genocides, there are accusations or rumors about mass graves. So I'm wondering where do we draw the line and say this is not the right of defense anymore, but this is a step too far?
That is being discussed indeed in the authorities that are dealing exactly with those topics. What I really want to add is that we have done everything possible to bring humanitarian aid to Gaza. We have quadrupled our humanitarian aid. We have started a maritime corridor now from Cyprus to northern Gaza. And actually the first ship that went from Cyprus with humanitarian aid to northern Gaza was the first one since 2005. So we have to discuss these important topics without any question, but in the meantime, everyone has to do its utmost to bring more humanitarian aid to Gaza, and there are ways and means, as we have shown, to really fulfill that.
Thank you. Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann was first. You wanted to respond?
Yeah, just to say one word. We could see 2 weeks ago when Iran attacks Israel for the first time after 1979, direct. No proxies, no Hamas, no Hezbollah, no Houthis. And you could, if you talk to the Jordan people, to Egypt people, everybody in the Middle East wants to have peace. Nobody is interested more, and you could see many countries, even Arabic countries, helps Israel. So one thing we have to do, we need a two-state solution, and for everybody in this area, they are looking for peace. This discussion, we are looking here, this discussion, it's really an old one. We have to look forward, and I'm very optimistic, just in this case, that we could find a new way in the Middle East.
Thank you. Mr. Vistisen, you want to use your Jolly card for this debate, for this topic?
Yes, because I think we are forgetting what our main responsibility is here, and that is to combat the rise of anti-Semitism we are seeing all across the European continent as a result of this conflict. and also as a result of the people that have been let in with values that are very similar to those that have been here in the past. So I'd ask you, Ursula von der Leyen, what are we going to do to combat anti-Semitism? Will you go with me to Copenhagen and meet with the Danish Zionist Union and hear them talk about the fear that they have not seen in European streets for more than 70 years?
I will do everything necessary and possible to combat anti-Semitism, because everyone in the European Union is free to live as they want, and independent of, for example, your religion or any other aspect. So we have done a lot in this mandate to fight anti-Semitism. We have created a whole action plan to protect people to live their faith as they want. Anti-Semitism is unacceptable in the European Union. I want the Jewish culture to thrive in the European Union, as it has always done over centuries. So I would go with you even to Copenhagen if it is necessary, and make the most to acknowledge that Jewish life in the European Union is welcome and has its place in the European Union.
Thank you.
Mr. Bayer, you were waiting to give a reaction.
Yeah. My father survived Auschwitz, and I find it simply ridiculous to hear from a representative of a far-right party presenting himself as a defender against anti-Semitism. And having said this, Mrs. von der Leyen, what you say is extremely unsatisfactory. We have now 35,000 deaths in Gaza, and you tell us you will discuss with your friends what to do if, under certain circumstances, you will do this or that. Unacceptable from my point of view. For the people in Gaza, now every day is a 7th of October. We must stop this, and we want the European Union to take action and not tolerate this going on further.
Thank you. Mr. Vistisen, we'll give you a chance to respond to this before we move on.
So let's join me in Copenhagen, where the head of my list is a Holocaust survivor, where he was saved by the evil right-wing Danish resistance to Sweden, as we saved 95% of our Jewish population in Denmark. Friends from the left to the right did that. I'm very proud of that. And I hope that we can use those examples in European history to now save our Jewish population. But from the extreme left, we are seeing and hearing anti-Semitism this day, also in the European Parliament, and I find it despicable.
Okay, thank you. We will now look at a question from the audience to move on to our next questions.
Hello, my name is Christelle Saval and I'm the president of the Young European Federalists Jeff Europe. Together with Make.org, we launched this huge consultation across the EU asking young people what they want for the future of Europe. We gathered more than 5,000 proposals, 1.5 million votes, and one of the 15 proposals their consensus on, the Agenda of Hope, is strengthening EU voice in diplomacy. So what are your plans to do this? To change the treaties, remove the unanimity principle, and move towards a more united foreign policy that we all need?
Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann, you want to get rid of this principle where each European country can veto decisions on foreign policy. How will you convince Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban to cede his veto power?
Okay, I just understand not every word what she said. It was very fast. Sorry about it. Maybe you could repeat it what she said.
The main thing was indeed how can we be more efficient in our foreign policy discussions when it comes to EU policy, for example, getting rid of the unanimity principle.
Okay. Yes, of course, we have to, I mean, we are living in a democracy, and it's not absolutely, you couldn't explain to nobody in Europe that there's one country stop everything in the European Parliament. And for the first, we have to change this principle. Majority is majority, and you could see with Hungary what happens that once they could stop everything. And I tell you, from my view, it's really strange that Viktor Orban went to the toilet for 10 billion euro because nobody wants that he tells us that he don't want to help the Ukraine. And I think we have to do a lot. Majority is majority.
Thank you. Mr. Ghiletti, How will you ensure that Europe remains united in the wake of international security threats?
Well, Europe can and must stay united in front of these threats. But I believe, if we come to this question, that at the same time we need to convince each other. Our unity is in diversity. Our unity depends on how we are able to build bridges, to cooperate with each other. If we want to twist the hand of somebody, I don't believe this is sustainable. This is just a moment, but we think of the future. So for us, it's very important to stay as long as needed, but to find solutions, to find that common ground, and to keep Europe united in diversity, as we have the motto for the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bayer, in the past, the European left has had a long ideological link with the Chinese Communist Party. How would Europe navigate China's increasingly assertive behavior on the world stage?
Well, China is a huge country, and we don't have special relations or special discussions with the Chinese Communist Party. We say it has to play a constructive role when it comes to climate change, when it comes to ecological transformation, and when it comes to maintaining peace. And yes, we would see also China influencing Russia to stop the aggression in the Ukraine. But that's not a matter of ideology. That's a matter of real and practical politics. And I would wish that the European Union would be more actively trying to convince all parts of the global south, including India and China, for a peaceful and ecological responsible policy.
Thank you. We now want to turn to another hot topic in EU's foreign policy, and that is migration.
Mr. Eickhout, you oppose the EU's migration deals, which they have struck with countries such as Tunisia or Egypt. A majority of Europeans do, however, want more controlled migration. So how would you tackle this?
First of all, I have to say that I have a bit of a problem that the organizers have put migration in a corner of defense and security. That is, to me, a problem. But now on your question on the migration pact, we Greens are very much looking for a migration pact for real European solidarity. However, in a migration pact, you can buy it off. You just can pay money in order not to take any refugees. Children will be detained at our borders. We will lower the standards. We are basically solidifying fortress.
We know your criticism, but what would you do?
Yes, well, as long as we are not making sure that we are standing up for our human rights and that we are really creating European solidarity, there is no European solution, and that's where we stand for.
Thank you. Mrs. von der Leyen, we've read your party manifesto, and it says you want to seek third country migration deals similar to the UK's Rwanda plan. How far can the split stretch between respecting human rights on the one hand and responding to calls from the right?
First of all, you did not quote from our program because the word Rwanda is not in. And this is UK, and we have nothing to do with it.
But you're proposing something that very much goes in line towards
the UK left the European Union, let them discuss their issues, we discuss our issues. We have fulfilled our international obligation, and that's very important. In the past, we fulfill them today, and we fulfill them tomorrow. This is absolutely necessary, the Geneva Convention, the European Convention. But I think it is also in order to say that we Europeans are the one who decide who comes to the European Union and under what circumstances, and not the smugglers and traffickers. I think this is also important. And therefore, the agreements with the third countries, for example, Tunisia or Egypt, is investing in their economy, investing in the education system to create legal, safe pathways for people to come, also for protection, but not let not define the smugglers and traffickers who comes to the European Union and under what circumstances.
Thank you. And a kind reminder to respect the time. Mr. Wies, Ideas voted against the EU's migration pact because it's not tough enough on migrants. It is, of course, easy to shout from the sidelines. How would you deal with this thorny issue if you were in charge?
With the only effective way that has been proven, the Australian model. To say that if you try to enter into Europe illegally, the only thing you can be certain of is that you'll have no residency here on this continent. But we can begin much easier if you just implemented the policies of Denmark, a European Union membership country, then the number of asylum seekers in Germany would drop 90%. The number in France would drop 80%. So the only thing we need to do to solve the migration crisis is political will to do so. Unfortunately, the ID party is the only one represented today who wants to deal with illegal migration in an efficient manner, not just talk about it forever and ever while millions are coming illegally to this continent.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Schmidt, some of your party members are criticizing the EU's migration deals, whereas on the other hand, some are implementing much stricter migration policies. Take Denmark with the socialist prime minister. How would you address migration policy if you were Commission President?
Well, first, I think migration has been transformed into a toxic subject by the extreme right. It has become a major issue, always dividing our society on this topic. Second is, obviously, and I agree with Madame von der Leyen,
Ursula,
that we have really to fight smugglers. This is clear. That's why we have to improve our measures to control our borders. Third is about the humanity and human rights, because this is fundamental. We are Europe. We are finally, the center of Europe are our human values, our human rights. And the third is about procedures. If people are there for months and years, how can you send them back? So return is the other side of the coin, and that's why we have to activate, we have to better organize, we have to give people also the chances. And we have not talked, by the way, about legal migration, because Europe needs legal migration.
We're going to stop you there. Thank you very much. Mrs. Rosberg, you wanted to...
Yeah, I find it very interesting that in this context it has not been mentioned that actually, and also the far right in this context, you don't want people to come to Europe, but you're also against one of the main reasons why people actually are coming and will be coming in greater amount in the future, and that's climate change.
Okay. Thank you very much for your answers. We will now turn to our third and last theme for tonight, EU democracy.
The European Union's effectiveness in multi-level governance has come under intense scrutiny in recent times. Young citizens associate themes such as democratization, legitimacy, transparency, and economic and social justice with discussions around reforming the EU to better serve its diverse member states while fostering trust and transparency among citizens.
In this theme, democracy, we will consider three threats to European democracy. First, foreign interference. Second, mounting pressure on the rule of law. And three, threats coming from new technology. And to kick off this section, we would like to ask the candidates how the EU can protect itself against foreign interference. Mr. Schmidt, to start with you. The European Socialists have been hit by investigations into members of your group for allegations of corruption by foreign countries. How will you restore the trust of European voters?
Well, I think we have taken all the measures, really, to fight all kinds of interferences or corruptions. This was a case, indeed, and we have excluded all the persons who have been involved in it. This was a special case. Now, we see that there are systematic interferences, systematic influences, and it has already been said, especially on the extreme right, where we see that these parties are financed by Putin. They are really encouraged by Putin to support also his policies of aggression. So I think we have to be clear. We have to show what happens. In the European Parliament, there is now a committee dealing with these interferences, and I think this has to be made public, and we have to fight any problem with interferences.
Thank you, Mrs. von der Leyen. Throughout your campaign, you've been criticizing the far right when it comes to foreign interference, but shouldn't the EU have been more alert, more prepared?
Yes, of course. I mean, when you have 27 member states and 450 million people working together, it's not all perfect. So let's work on that one. But I think it is very important that we should not be distracted from the real problem, and these are the proxies of Putin, who try to destroy the European Union from within through disinformation and for polarization. And we see an example here tonight. So we have to be very clear that we are not willing to accept any kind of interference. And there we also have to make sure that the cyber interference is being controlled. But it's a tough fight. And I want to be very clear. We will not allow that you destroy the European Union. We are stronger than you, and we will fight your interference with all means.
Mr. Eickhout, you put out your jolly. Who is it you want to ask a question to?
Jolly good now. So this is to Madam von der Leyen. You have been very clear, and where we can really agree on, you said, I will in the future only work with parties that are pro-Ukraine, pro-democracy and pro-Europe. But every time when you then gave examples, you always talked about the party of Mr. Vistisen. So you only mentioned ID. I think our voters need to be clear, where do you stand on ECR? Where there is a Vox, where the leader of Vox is saying, you know, the best times of Spain were under Franco. Or where you have Le Reconquête and from France, Zemmour, who said we need a French Putin.
Okay.
Or the PiS party from Poland, where you froze also money, European money. So apparently they are a threat for democracy. It's time you are clear that you are not going to cooperate with ECR.
Yes, you are. So first of all, it's the European Parliament that has to find majorities. You are mentioning peace where we froze the money, you are right. Now we have the Tusk government, so we were able to de-block the money because they fulfilled the conditions. Actually, this is the same with Hungary. Hungary, there are certain obligations if you want to access the European funds. Hungary did not fulfill these obligations, so we have frozen money. We were able, because Hungary did some of the reforms that were necessary, then to de-block the 10 billion. For Hungary, 2/3 are still blocked. So in this respect, we are dealing with the rule of law. The rule of law is important for us, the institutions, but it's also important for the members.
I think the question was, are you open to cooperation with ECR in the next mandate?
It depends very much on how the composition of the parliament is and who is in what group.
What?
Oh.
Thank you. That was clear. Mr. Vistisen, we'll come back to your jolly, Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann. Mr. Vistisen, what is your response to the accusations of Mrs. von der Leyen, and especially, may I put it in the light of the recent allegations of Chinese espionage by staff members of your party?
Not by my party, it's a personal staff member, but my response is the same, whether socialists take money from Morocco, whether Mr. von der Leyen have dealings with Pfizer, or whether people in my group have problems with corruption. You have to combat it, you have to fight it. But what you're doing is that you're making equality between legitimate criticizing a federalist European Union and misinformation. I have not conducted misinformation today. I have debated open and freely, and you didn't want me on this stage. The organizers had to think very long and hard whether my voice would be heard at all on this stage. So I'm not the enemy of democracy, free debate, and freedom of expression. That's you when you talk to the Czech giants to limit my freedom of expression based on my political opinions.
Thank you. Your time is up. We've got two jollies, I'm sorry. Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann, who do you want to ask a question to?
Yes, I want to ask Ms. von der Leyen. Von der Leyen, you know Maximilian Krah, he's a member of the European Parliament, and he's a Spitzenkandidat from the AfD. For all people, it's a right-wing party in Germany. It's really a pleasure to meet them. And so my question is, we know, or nearly we know, that he is a spy. He has an employee working for China. He has a colleague.
Your question?
My question is it, maybe I understand it wrong, are you really sure to work together with Maximilian Krah and all these people from AfD when they come back to the European Parliament?
A definite no. These are the compatriots of him. So, and indeed.
I know.
And indeed.
But
that are the friends of you.
Yes,
so
but it's very important.
No on my side.
But it's
if
very
I was not clear enough, now you hear it very clearly. And yeah, as we have no time, I will not go in depth.
No, but I think your answer was very clear. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Mr. Schmidt, you were also...
But it was very important to answer very clear, because it must be clear that the Conservatives never work together with the right wing in Europe. It's really, really important to know it.
Mr.
Finally,
Schmidt,
I was a bit astonished by your response, saying it depends on the composition of the European Parliament.
Exactly.
That was something a bit strange, because values and rights cannot be divided according to some political arrangements. Either you can deal with the extreme right because you need them, or you say clearly there is no deal possible because they do not respect the fundamental rights our Commission has fought for. And we have fought, for instance, for LGBTI rights. Okay. We have fought for equality, media freedom. And I see in some countries where the extreme right, ECR, by the way, is in power, they do not respect that. They are already abolishing these rights.
And your
so I think that
question?
this has to be precise.
Mr. Vistison, I'll give you one more chance to, you wanted to respond to?
It's just a very strange question, because I remember a time where a socialist president of Malta and a prime minister of Malta had journalists who were killed, and there was not a sufficient investigation. I remember you were sitting with the now prime minister of Slovakia as well.
No.
And it seems like there's a double standard on what you are accepting. And it seems like you want to label all Europe's problems on me, and I can bear it. But you are the one who have been in charge. So if things are running so poorly and so bad, try something else. And Denmark is a vibrant democracy, even though that we have been part of the political establishment for more than 20 years. And I wouldn't change it for the world.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to look at another threat that comes from technology now, Mr. Bayer. Sora is the name, we'll come to you, Ms. Ilecci. Sora is the name of the next AI model to be launched very soon. And that model instantly creates text to video. What is true and what has truly happened will soon be impossible to tell. Should Sora be introduced just like that, Mr. Bayer?
I share the opinion that we must be very careful in introducing AI models. AI can be very beneficial in many fields, but at the same time, it's a very dangerous technology, and it must be democratically controlled. It must be based on the principle that humans are the ones who control it. And I must say, I'm very disappointed by the AI Act, which recently passed the European Parliament, not because it is an AI Act, and that might be important, but because it has so many loopholes and it is so incomplete, it even leaves the right to assess the high risks to the companies which develop the application.
Thank you. But can I read your answer as a no?
I would say, let's be careful and let's look what happens. I would neither say yes and no.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann, social media, free enterprise is profit-driven, used by anyone, including enemies of democracy. Is that incompatible with the democratic importance of public space, such as social media?
First of all, social media, it's our today, and we have to look forward. We use it, everybody uses it from morning, so we have to see what happens in social media. And all who are responsible for the platforms of social media, there are rules. And we have to look forward, for example, TikTok and otherwise, what happens there. So social media, it's important. We couldn't stop it. We need rules. But on the other hand, there are responsible for these platforms who we are connected with.
Mrs. von der Leyen, to follow up on that, the US is considering a ban on TikTok because of its ties with the Chinese government. We leave TikTok unrestricted. If you return to the Commission, what would you do about it?
It is not excluded, because the Commission was the very first institution worldwide to ban TikTok on our corporate telephones. So to be very divisive, to be very clear that we know exactly the danger of TikTok. We've done a lot to regulate. For example, the Digital Services Act, to make sure that the platforms take responsibility for the content they provide, or the Digital Markets Act, to make sure that the big ones are not the gatekeepers, but there's fair access to the market for every provider. And what AI is concerned, I understand your worries, but what we've done is be open for the immense possibility and innovation power that AI has, and on the other hand, regulate And therefore, there is, from the European Union, a strong push for the world to regulate this field.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ghilecci, I saw your jolly waving.
Yes. Well, since I didn't have a chance to touch on foreign interference, I'd like to address a question now to Ms. von der Leyen. It's obvious that corruption is one of the, let's say, biggest weakness when it comes to interference. I'm not accusing you of being influenced in this case by Russia, but my question is this, Ms. von der Leyen. You have several files opened against you. If you are appointed for a next mandate, do you commit here to be radically transparent and cooperate with the prosecution in the context of the files that were opened against you?
Listen, we have a judiciary that is independent, and of course the judiciary creates the transparency that is necessary. I respect our independent judiciary.
But do you commit to be transparent? That was the question.
I am
transparent.
I am transparent, and it is the judiciary that deals with that.
Maybe just to follow up on that, because the far right is using, several parties, including the far right, is using Pfizergate against you in this campaign. Do you regret the way you've brokered these deals?
Look, the topic you are mentioning, the vaccines of the pandemic, first of all, life-saving. We have achieved to vaccinate, at least with one shot, 80% of the Europeans. We should not forget that. How were these contracts made? So they were approved by the member states. Each individual member state had a contract with a pharmaceutical company. They were signed by the member states, not by the Commission. And the money that flowed was by member state money, and not Commission, not European money. So very clear transparency on that one, and that is being discussed.
Thank you. Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann, now that we're talking about the rule of law, Hungary's tactics may inspire other member countries that break the rule of law. Countries can try to undo the penalties by threatening to veto, such as Hungary did with the support for Ukraine. Is the EU becoming hostage to its member states?
I think there is a possibility. There you have the paragraph 7. So there is a possibility to explain this. For example, Hungary, that if it's, if it's, how could I say, the rules of law in their own country, and it affects the whole European Union. And so you have to tell them, if they don't stop it, then you could use the paragraph 7 to say there's no possibility for Hungary, for example, to vote anymore in the EU. And I think we have to be really strong in this case. Otherwise, we lost this really free and independent European Union.
Mrs. Rosberg?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to actually what you said. I agree that maybe the European Union has become a hostage to its member states, national states. But for me, there's a very simple solution for that. Strengthen the European Parliament, give it the rights to actually also act and not only react. And then the other solution to that is, as a counterweight to the national states, strengthen the Committee of the Region and make sure that all regions are heard. And it's not only about the capitals and the member states.
Thank you. Mr. Vistisen.
Yeah, but I think, again, the fundamental problem here is it's a power grab. You want to have more legislation, but at the same time, you want to abolish the veto right, but you also want to enlarge the European Union with countries that have a far worse track record than Orban Hungary. So it doesn't add up. Even the chairman of the council was saying that he wanted the enlargement before 2030. I think he's been a little bit more reluctant to repeat that since. But when you're talking about 8 to 10 new member countries with a worse track record than what we know today, you are gambling with rule of law. And nobody wants to debate that because it's become a holy cow that you cannot debate the merits of this enlargement.
Thank you. Mr. Ghilecci, fundamentally the EU is a democratic peace project. But nevertheless, we saw this rule of law dismantled in Poland, in Hungary, and now under threat in Slovakia. How can the EU better protect itself and its rule of law?
By respecting the rule of law. So when we have a rule of law, we need to enforce that rule of law. This is why you have the European Court of Justice and we have European institutions that they need to tackle such situations. So I personally believe, as Ms. von der Leyen said earlier, that justice should be independent. And when it comes to an issues like this, the rule of law, somebody breached the rule of law, then justice has to say its word. Who is guilty, who broke the rule of law, and what should be the sanctions for the breaching the rule of law. So again, we cannot invent anything else that we already have here in place in every democratic countries. You have justice, you have judiciary, that they decide who broke the law and who not.
Thank you. You will barely believe it, but it takes us to the end of our debate. We would now like to invite our candidates for closing statements of no more than 1 minute. We're going to start with you, Mrs. Rosberg. You have 1 minute. Take it away.
Well, actually, I want to use this time to ask you here on stage one last question, and that is what you see when you look around in the room. Because what I see are 1,000 young people with dreams and hopes and imaginations of how their future will look. I will not become the next Commission President, and I will also not be an MEP. But most of you will. And I need you to remember this view. I need you to remember that when in power, you're not just deciding directives and regulations, you're deciding about the future of our generation. You're deciding whether we protect our democracy or walk into chaos, or whether we let borders unite us or we let them divide us. Those are the choices you need to make. If I could, I would know what I would choose. But most of all, I would choose a Europe our generation is proud to belong to.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Eickhout, please, you have the floor.
First of all, I do know that there's quite some cynicism sometimes about what is politics and are the politicians still delivering for you? I can tell you, in 2019, it's because of your generation, it's because of you that Europe acted on the Green Deal. The young generation in 2019 was fighting for a Green Deal, for climate policies, and thanks to that movement, Europe was moving. But we are at the crossroads. We are really at the crossroad as Europe. We are now at the crossroad of continuing the Green Deal or go back to a fossil standstill. For democracy or autocracy. We are also for a strong Europe or a divided Europe. Really, these elections matter massively. And we need you again to fight for a strong Europe, to fight for a Europe that delivers on green and social policies, and a strong Europe that protects us. Choose courage.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Vistisen, you have the floor for your closing statement.
It's really a rather simple choice, because Europe have for the last 20 years been ruled by the Grand Coalition. So even though we can stand here for 1.5 hours to debate, when they go back to Brussels, they will form a big alliance and everything will be passed in that. There is only the ID group who is standing in opposition to that. So if you want the federalist EU state, you can choose them. If you want a cooperation of national states, you can vote for us. If you want more mass migration, completely unregulated, you can vote for them. If you want tight migration laws and secure borders, you can vote for us. And if you want to have more bureaucracy, more taxation, less economy here in Europe, please vote for them. If you want to be a free European citizen, able to fulfill the promise that this continent have, vote for us. It's so simple in this election. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mrs. von der Leyen, may we please have your closing statement?
Yes, thank you so much. When I was walking in, someone asked me what motivates you every day. And I must admit I'm no more as young as Mrs. Rosberg and Bas Eickhout. I am here being a mother and grandmother already, but this shapes the view how I see the future. And Europe has brought us so much: peace, freedom, prosperity. But today, what I'm really worried about is that these values are under attack from within and from outside. And therefore, I advocate that we who love Europe, stand united and stand proud for a strong Europe, that we know that we want to build a majority for a strong Europe. And I want to build this majority with you, with my experience, with solutions, and with all my passion I have for Europe. And for that, I ask you for support.
Thank you. Mr. Schmidt, it is your turn for your closing statement.
For Social Democrats and for myself, Europe needs courageous solutions. We need to be bold on industry, we need to be bold on defense, we need to be bold on fighting climate change, but also we need to be bold on social justice. We need to combat poverty. Too many people at risk of poverty in our union. That's why we defend a strong welfare state in the European Union. We will promote investments, and that's why we need the adequate resources at the European level. We want to have decent housing, especially for young people. And investment in youth, investment in your presence, not just the future, is absolutely indispensable. And that's the Europe we want to build together. Together for hope, but together for a democratic Europe, together for a strong Europe.
Thank you. Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Today we debate several important issues, and I believe security was key. Our prosperity and well-being depend upon it. EU challenges need a unified approach, from addressing climate change to promote economic growth while bringing everyone along. Security has taken various forms: defense, personnel, climate. But let me be clear, when I speak of security, I'm talking about your security in all senses, not about the job security of us here on stage. Many of you will soon probably vote for the first time. My hope is that tonight's debate has inspired you to raise your voices. Let's optimistic fuel your commitment to our liberal, secure version for Europe. A Europe where my grandchildren, where you can flourish in safety, prosperity and freedom. Thank you very much. Vielen Dank.
Mr. Bayer, the floor is yours.
We say politics is about choosing sides. We choose the side of the social disadvantage. People who have troubles paying their bills and rent, parents who can't afford holidays with their kids, people who wait for ages in understaffed hospitals, women who still suffer the pay discrimination, young people who won't find affordable housing. We think that all these people and you deserve better. EU politicians so far have failed to deliver what they have promised. Now it even so that it can turn to the worse. You can change this, not only by your vote, but you should use your vote. We choose side. We want the better for the many and not more for the few. Vote for the left. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ghilardi, you have the final word.
I was born and grew up in the Soviet Union. Half of my life I spent in the Soviet Moldova. Looking back and realizing that I'm here tonight, I can say that even in my wildest dream, I couldn't see that a former Soviet soldier would stay tonight in Maastricht in this free debate. But this proves that our dreams can become a reality. And I will encourage you to care for your fundamental freedoms. I am a blessed father of 3 children. My oldest son is here, and a grandfather of 7 children. But I care for Europe, for the future of Europe. And I believe that ECPM candidates, they deserve your vote in these June elections. So I encourage you to support them with their vote because they are defenders of these fundamental freedoms. And it is my prayer that God will bless Europe.
Thank you. Thank you. We would now like to return to our poll question from the beginning to see if this debate has influenced who you think should be the next European Commission President. You can return to Slido to cast your vote and make sure that you are in the post-debate room.
Well, meanwhile, we would like to say a huge thank you to our candidates standing here. We look back on a meaningful and a passionate debate. We would also like to thank our audience in the room and online. And thank you to our dear partners, the Maastricht University, the City of Maastricht and the Province of Limburg, as well as Studio Europa Maastricht and Politico.
Thank you. Now let's take a final look at your votes. It seems that Bas Eickhout is still the winner after the debate with even more. And European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is still the second person with a slight change in percentage. But of course, a lot can still happen between now and the elections. So to wrap up, we want to urge you to make sure to cast your vote between June 6 and 9. Thank you very much.